Welcome to Causing the Effect, a podcast focused on the exploration of your mind, body, and spirit.
Kelly Smith, what's up? How we feeling?
I am feeling so good. What about you?
Pretty good. Kelly Smith, everyone, is the host of the meditation podcast Mindful in Minutes. There is the Kelly Smith School, Yoga for You, which is really, these are good names, Mindful in Minutes and Yoga for You. We're going to be talking yoga, meditation, restorative yoga, all this good stuff. But Kelly just had a good question, and I'm going to give the breakdown because I was thinking about this, and I just came back from Costa Rica. I was telling Kelly, I've never experienced the places I go, Hawaii, Alaska. They're more for like the scenery. They're not so much for like the wildlife. And Costa Rica was all wildlife. So start with your question, tell the story, and then we will just get into it.
Sure. So we were just chatting off mic before we started the podcast, and I was just wondering if you've ever had like this really profound experience like with animals, because just this morning I was feeding my little guy pork chop breakfast, and the dog started going crazy. And I was like, okay, that's weird. She always barks like if there's a dog walking down the street or whatever. We just live in the suburbs in Minnesota. But this bark sounded different. So I was like, I'm going to go investigate. So I look out the window in the front of our house, and there's this giant stag just like walking down the middle of the road. It's not bothered by anything. It's not scared. It's like 7 a.m. It's really kind of just slowly. And I think I said like with a swagger, it kind of did just like making itself known, walking down just the middle of my street, no other deer, nothing. And it felt so unusual and significant. And what I haven't told you yet, Scott, is it's actually my second significant deer sighting in 10 years. I once, after doing a Reiki training, was driving home. This was like 10 years ago. So I was still living at home with my parents. And I was driving home, and I just was turning the corner, and I just looked out the right window, and on the sidewalk was this giant stag just standing there looking really proud, no other deer, just standing there. And then I looked away for a second, then did a double take, like, what did I just see? And it was gone. And that was like 10 years ago. And then this morning there's just this huge deer just walking down the road, not a bother. No one else was looking at it, I don't think. Just, it seemed like it was just, I needed to see it. And I haven't had a chance to meditate on it, try to figure out what it is. But I am very curious if you've ever had an animal experience like that felt so just like out of the ordinary and significant.
So I will preface this with, I'm not the animal guy, right? So I was telling Kelly, like, my trips are more for like the stars, the scenery, this and that. Going to Costa Rica was it was a different game. So I'll send you the video of this after. It's so funny you brought this up. It's just so random. Like, I stayed in a private villa, Costa Rica beach by myself, all this stuff. And they told me like, there's going to be monkeys, like white-faced monkeys. And lo and behold, there was like this family of monkeys that would come every day right around 2-3 p.m. And you could tell like they wanted nothing to do with me except for this one little guy. I couldn't tell. I don't know, I'm sure it was the kid, but like there was one little guy who would like come, and like he was like busting my chops almost. It was like funny, like having a relationship. I was there 5 or 6 days. He was sitting there like, I left peanuts one day. He came and like was looking and creeping. So by the second or third day, we kind of became pals. And when I would go inside, because I had like a hut, like a house, he would go and bang the top of the house. And then I would come out, and then he would be sitting there. And then I would go back in, he would bang the top of the house. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And ever since then, I've been having dreams of monkeys banging on my house and like being around. And I was looking up like, I don't know if you did this with the stag, but like I was Googling like, what does a monkey represent in psychology and all this.
That's like
and
immediately what I did
yeah,
this
it was like the first thing. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming the stag was like stamina, endurance, or persevering, something of that nature. The monkey represented two ends of the coin, which is so interesting because I look at things in, like the yin and the yang, these the ways, and it could represent the knowledge of others, but it could also represent your ignorance of others and understanding others. I was like, oh shit, like this is an interesting perspective to come from, because like I guess the monkey has two things you could look at it, that there's an ignorant side, but then there's the the positive side, like the playfulness, the joy, and all that. I was like meditating. I like that word, meditate. I was meditating on this whole thing this week of like, because on this trip to I take them to be more of like a time for myself, but a time to really reflect. So I was reading the Tao Te Ching. I was reading a little bit of the Bible, a little bit of, you know, Divine Comedy, and all these things that really make you look at it. And that's kind of what I felt going into this. Like I felt shifted of perspective. I'm very grateful and happy for what I have, but at the same point, there's certainly things for me to work on and things for me to like get out of it. So I think the monkey did certainly help with that. I wouldn't have any other animal story, to be honest with you, besides that. So I hope that sufficed.
No, that definitely. I
Yeah.
love hearing about that. And I told one other person about the stag. I was on a call with a client, but also kind of a friend and someone who's very into like the woo woo, which are the best friends, the
Yeah.
people that you can just be like, hey, you have to hear about this crazy stag story. What do you think that means? And then she's a past life regression specialist. So she's like, I'll take your stag and like raise you a spirit guide or whatever it is. And she gave me this really interesting perspective of like, when you're meditating on something like that, you can almost like use the experience as like an oracle card. And I haven't had a chance to do this yet, but she said you like sit and you meditate and you put yourself back in that situation and you like visualize the animal, kind of like, you know, what, like, just what kind of a vibe do you get from the animal? Like, how is it presenting itself? How are you feeling then in that reaction, and trying to infer like what was actually happening then, and maybe either like a lesson, or you can see what it represents by looking at like in, you know, retrospectively, like what was that interaction really like? And how does that make you feel? Like what kind of significance may that hold? And that sometimes can give you some answers to the meaning of that particular like animal interaction.
And when you saw the first stag 10 years
Yeah.
ago, was there anything that happened from that, or significant thing that happened near that, or something? Is there a story
So
there?
yeah, there is a little bit of a story there. I was doing a Reiki training. And so everything was kind of just like open, energy was flowing. I spent the whole day kind of trying to do this like energy work. So I was kind of, you know, like, woo, not in planet Earth by the end of the day. But I also had done the Reiki training. I was just at kind of a really pivotal point in my life of trying to decide, like, do I want to pursue my dream? Do I want to, at this point, it was trying to decide the person, which, you know, here's the spoiler alert, but I was trying to decide, my now husband, but then only boyfriend, was pursuing medical school. And I was trying to decide, do I want to follow along on this dream with him? Is that the right decision? You know, is forging my own path, you know, ending that connection, is that the right decision? And really trying to figure out, you know, when you're in your early 20s, it's like, who am I? What do I want to do with my life? Kind of a thing. I think we
Sure.
all, for the most part, go through it like, what is life? And so I was really thinking about like, which direction did I want to go in? And when I Googled it, when I saw this stag, it said that it represents like navigating change with grace. So like being able to smoothly navigate a change. And I'd really been thinking, I knew a change was coming. I didn't know which direction I wanted to go. And at the time, I took that really as a sign of like, I don't necessarily need to know which direction I want to go. It'll kind of like, I just need to trust my gut, and I'll be able to kind of navigate the change with kind of like ease as it comes.
And is that what you
And
did?
I mean, I married that man and we have a child now, and
See?
and Yoga for You was born from it. I wouldn't say that the change I necessarily, I mean, grace is relative. So, you know, it definitely was a bumpy road. However, I do think it was definitely like what I was supposed to do. And it kind of did just, I just trusted my gut, and it's led me to where I am today. So, but I think about it back then, and it just, I felt, you know, you get crossroads in your life all the time, and you're kind of looking at these two. And I firmly believe that often we don't have a right or wrong decision. We just have two different options and that we get to choose, and they may take us on different paths. It's not to say sometimes can be right or wrong, but I think often it can be, you know, is this like, it's just two different paths, and you get to pick which one you want to walk on. You also can change your mind at times. And that's where, like, you know, not to circle it back to like the work that I do, but like meditation, reflection, like turning inward, just kind of like you were doing, Scott, in Costa Rica, like reflecting. When you have those tools to be able to do it, I think when you're faced with a crossroads, you can use all of those tools to try to figure out like which path you want to take.
Yes, and I agree with it. And fuck it, let's bring it back to meditation and talking about this stuff. This is what I want to talk to you about. You're the queen of this. I liked how I think it was either on your, I saw something that you were saying, it's either your website or when I was doing my diligence on you, like you don't, you believe that yoga is not, it's not just about postures, it's about like the true lifestyle. And for me, I started this year to get heavily into the 8 limbs of yoga. I'm sure you're familiar with that and all that good
Good
stuff.
old Patanjali.
Yes, exactly. And I've been this week, not so much, but recently I've been really focusing on starting my day off with the asanas, the postures, then moving towards the pranayama, then pratyahara, the sense withdrawal, and then going to dharana following. Like I was sort of following those, and I said, let me put them all together. And I think all of this, I think when you start this, you want to reduce anxiety, which is like the reason I got into this, but it becomes so much more than that. It becomes like, I don't like what is all of this? What does it mean to you, like yoga in general? Because it's hard for me to put into words.
So yoga for me is a practice, which we are, familiar with. But I think of it as like a practice for life. So for example, when we're meditating, which is, so just to go through kind of, the 8 limbs, which, you just teed me up for like one of my favorite things in the whole
Perfect.
world. So thank you. The 8 limbs, if anyone's unfamiliar with them or need a refresher, so they come from this man Patanjali, who's considered like the grandfather of yoga, or at least yoga as we know it today. He wrote the Yoga Sutras, which is our first kind of like yoga how-to. And in there, he lays out the 8 limb path, or the 8-fold path of yoga, which is where most like hatha yoga, which is like asana based type yoga, comes from. However, in the Yoga Sutras, there's only one pose that's described. It would be, lotus or easy seated pose. But these 8 limbs, so you have the yamas, which is like how you interact with yourself. You have the niyamas, which is kind of like how you interact with the world around you. You have the asanas, so the poses. You have pranayama, which is the breath. You have dhyana, which is concentration. You have pratyahara, which is withdrawal of the senses. You have samadhi, which is like union with the self. And then you also have, which one did I forget? Yamas, niyamas, asanas, pranayama, concentration, meditation, breath work, and samadhi, and union of the self. I think I got them all. Okay, I think I got them all. But those are the 8 different limbs. And I think, but basically the idea is that if you're truly practicing yoga, you're engaging in all 8 of these at the same time. There's different people believe whether you have to do them in a particular order, like you need to start with the yamas and you have to really get right with yourself first before you can practice anything else. I personally don't believe that. I think we're all consistently working on all of these kind of equally at the same time. And I really love, the physical. We're recording on a Friday. I lead a Friday morning yoga class, which I love, which are the asanas. And I think that that's great movement for the body. However, that's 1/8 of like truly what yoga is. So for me, when I get on the mat and I'm moving my body, that's practicing then for like functional movement throughout the day with other movement with my body. When I'm meditating, I'm exploring, different feelings or sensations, or being an observer, and like I'm practicing while meditating for then like the greater everyday life. Because if I can manage my stress, if I can manage my distracted mind while I'm sitting there in meditation, then I can do it in my everyday life when I'm working or I'm with my child or whatever it is. When I'm working on the yamas and I'm, practicing truthfulness or nonviolence towards myself, right? Like practicing that every day, that's a practice of how do I kind of get right with myself, but also how do I show up as, a good intentional person in this world as well, and interact with others. Like these are all practices that we're constantly working on at the same time, like simultaneously, but also individually as well. And so for me, like yoga is such a big thing. It's like just a general practice that I try to embody into all the different corners of my life, using those 8 different limbs.
That was a great answer. Very,
Okay,
very
thanks.
nice. No. And yeah, there's something you said there with it's like during COVID, I really just dug deep into everything. And it's like I was meditating for 2 hours. Like life was great in this little place. I freaking loved it. I was like, this is easy. And I thought this is what it's supposed to be. It's like peace, but it's not just peace. It's like you have to be able to be out there in the world with peace. Like I can go sit on a mountain now and be like one of those guys, just those yogis. But for me, it just doesn't. I feel like you don't get to see who you really are until there's a little bit of a rattle or a little bit of chaos. And if you're not able to be calm and less anxious in the world, like what is the point if you can't be in the world? So I think I learned that the hard way this year. And just like, once COVID kind of came to a close, it's like, you have to do things, you have to live. And I'm curious to know how COVID was for you throughout.
Yeah. Well, so what you're describing, just to circle back to that really quick, I often think of it as like you're in a rowboat and it's like the difference between like rowing in like a pool versus like on the ocean. Like you are still the same boat, you're rowing the same boat, but like the difference is like the waves, right? And so when we're first learning how to do these things in a controlled environment, it's like we're learning and we're paddling along in our nice, still controlled, temperature controlled like pool. But then when we take those things and we take it out into everyday life, that's like we're on the ocean and we're, having to navigate the elements and the waves and the ups and downs. And like, how do we then take our boat and navigate all of these ebbs and flows and changes? But in terms of COVID, it was a really interesting time. It was an interesting time for all of us. A lot of really interesting things were happening to me at the time. So I actually found out that I was pregnant with pork chop about like I think 5 days before lockdown. My
Wow.
husband was a medical resident and he happened to be working in the ICU. So he started working like in the thick of like the front lines of COVID. My podcast also saw the biggest boom that I've ever seen in 1 week ever because of, people like you and also people like me are trying to manage their stress. But at the same time, I thought I was going to lose my business because I was primarily traveling and doing pop-up trainings and doing retreats. And I was supposed to do a little bit of like a podcast tour. And I had to pull the plug on that. And I had my biggest single day loss ever in my business for its whole like 8-year history. One day, that was just a few days after I found out I was pregnant. And we didn't know what was happening with COVID. And my husband was resident, so we were still single income. And so some of the greatest things of finally the dream of becoming a mother was coming into realization. And also my podcast saw this big boom. Like I call my podcast my baby before babies. That was happening on the one side. And then on the other side, I was scared every day for what did it mean for my husband, but also what did it mean, for us living in this tiny little apartment. And being newly pregnant, I couldn't get an appointment. They deemed pregnancy non-essential at the beginning of the pandemic, so I couldn't get an appointment. And I thought I was going to lose my business all at the same time. And it was one of the hardest, probably I would say at least top 10, if not top 5 hardest moments of my life, just navigating, having these two kind of opposing things happening within one small time frame and also just in the one vessel of like me and my heart.
Why is everything so up and down, Kelly? I have the same freaking issues. It's just when things are good, they are so good. 2020, 2021, nothing touched me, Kelly. I was like a god. This year, I'll give you another one, Kelly. Kelly knows about the cancer in the family, all this stuff. I got mugged last month in the middle of Manhattan. You just can't make this shit up. Why does it happen this way?
I don't know. I do not have an answer for that one. And if I did, I don't even know. But I do think that something that I've been reflecting on a lot, and ever since I became a parent, I have realized that my capacity to be able to hold two opposing things within one person of myself has grown. And so to be able to have the capacity to hold kind of, and I don't like calling things, the bad and the good. I mean, it's easy, definitely some are better than others, and say, oh, the pregnancy is 100% good. And then COVID is 100% bad, which like, I mean, they are, two very different things. But I think that there's complexity in everything that we do. So it's hard to kind of live in this like binary world of like this one isolated thing is like 100% good for me and for everyone. And this is bad. But that's for everyone to contemplate within themselves. Like, what is the meaning of like good and bad? But my capacity to be able to hold these opposing things of like the excitement of finally becoming a mother, and then also the fear of what does this mean to be pregnant at this time, or what does this mean for my business? What does this mean for my family? And to hold those two opposing things within myself at the same time, I think that my capacity to do that has grown. But I think we also are often giving these things at the same time to learn how to manage opposing thing. A lot of life is contradictory. A lot of it is opposing. A lot of it is confusing. And we have to be able to sit and navigate those things and to be able to hold opposing feelings and sensations and even ideas, sometimes contradictory ideas. Like, how do you change a belief that you have? You have to be introduced into something that is contradictory to the current belief that you hold. And you have to sit with then the opposite of it or a different perspective of it, sit with that, contemplate that, and then reconcile these two differing viewpoints that you have within you to then come to what actually feels right and what is your true belief. We need to be able to do this as human beings in order to function, but to grow and to, be someone that is evolving and changing and navigating life.
Would you say that it sounds like there's acceptance behind that, to make it very simple, of like an acceptance? So this is something I think just it comes with being a human, and particularly in today's society of like talking out of the two sides of your mouth, even like with the podcast, like I want to be on my point. I'm talking about the stuff I got, but sometimes you're not. And, having I like how you said that contradictory, because even that's very soft to what I say to myself. I'm like, you're a fucking liar. You're doing all this, like, blah, blah. Just being okay with what is almost. And for me, it's been really not only sitting with those feelings, but there's one thing sitting with a feeling, and there's another thing like truly feeling it. And I think when we start getting too caught up, it's more thinking, and you're just thinking, and you're going. When you start feeling it, it's almost a way that it moves out of the body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that, and this isn't to say I want to like give a little caveat. I'm not saying that like COVID is a good thing or like the fact that you got mugged is a good thing. Those are like horrible, tragic, awful things. But I do think that there is an element, like you said, of acceptance. But for me, I think of it as accepting that you may not be seeing the full picture yet. So for example, going back to that moment where I thought, it's March 2020, and I thought my business was going to go under. I only had like the snapshot of what was happening right there in that moment, in that very specific time frame of what was happening with my business. But what I couldn't see and I didn't know yet was that it actually was a change and a pivot to what I'm now doing, which is much more like location independent, like really working on, and having the podcast grow and things like that, that it wasn't actually, it was like the breakdown before the breakthrough. But I couldn't see that in the moment because all that was in front of me was what was in front of me. And I think there has to be an acceptance at times of like, we are kind of all like ignorant beings to a degree. And going back to Patanjali, he describes it as, through meditation, things like that. He describes it as like sitting in a dark room. So if everyone were to imagine right now, you just like woke up and you're in like a room and it's totally dark, you're going to take the information that you have. Maybe you're going to try to feel around, try to figure out, oh, there's a bed here. Maybe I'm in a bedroom, or, oh, there's, a lamp here. Maybe I could turn that lamp on. You're going to take the information that you can get based on what you can see to make, inferences on what's happening around you. But as you meditate, as you turn inward, as you do these practices, it's like letting a little more light into the room so you can start to see things a little bit more clearly. And I think there has to be a piece of acceptance at times that we may find ourselves in that dark room and we're trying to make sense of something based on the information that we have, but we don't have all the information yet. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, you nailed it. I think in Hinduism they call it Indra's net, which is like the whole process of nature is an integrated process of so much complexity, and it's just impossible to tell whether anything that happens to you, how you said, in that moment is good or bad, because you never know what will be the consequence of your misfortune or the consequence of a good fortune. Like, I got divorced in 2019. At that moment, that was the worst thing. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise in ways, obviously.
Yeah.
And did you ever hear of the parable of the Chinese farmer? You ever hear? I'm sure.
No, tell me
No.
about
Oh
it.
my. Okay.
Tell me.
So I'm going to butcher it, but um, once upon a time there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away, and that evening all of his neighbors, they come around to talk, and they said, "We're sorry to hear that your horse ran away." And the farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back, bringing 7 horses with it. And then the evening came, and everybody said, "Wow, aren't you lucky? What a turn of events. You have 8 horses now." And then the farmer said, "Maybe." And then the following day, his son tried to break one of the horses while riding it, and he was thrown and he broke his leg. And the neighbors said, "That's really too bad." And the farmer responded, "Maybe." Then the next day, the army comes to put people in the army, and they reject his son for having a broken leg. And the neighbors come around and said, "Oh, aren't you lucky?" And he says, "Maybe." That's
Yeah.
it.
Oh my gosh. I appreciate you sharing that. It's something definitely to sit with and think about, because I mean, it just makes me think of like, you never know. And I also think that things, like you said, can be like bad and good at the same time, right? Like something can be maybe 90% bad, but then also in that 10%, maybe there's a big lesson that you're learning, or you're, growing your resilience, or you're growing your ability to maybe turn inward or to love yourself, or whatever it is. That also, these opposing things, they can exist at the same time. Like life is complex. Things that happen in life are complex. Like very little in life is just, cut and dry. Like, you know, option A or option B. And I think that through, these tools that I love and both you love too, whether it be like meditation or reflection, introspection, that's where you then are getting the opportunity to come to your own conclusions, but also to let a little more light in the room to be able to see some things more clearly. Patanjali calls it our lens, the way that we're seeing things. And ultimately, what we want to do, the end game, would be to kind of remove your lens, right? Like take your glasses off and then just see it clearly without judgment, without, thoughts or beliefs or judgments or anything getting in your way, but just being able to like just clearly see it for what it is. Like if you think, imagine you're holding something in your hand. Let's say you're holding an apple in your hand. As soon as you look at it, you're telling yourself this whole story about the apple. Like, oh, I think it's a Honey Crisp, or I think it's that, or, whatever it is. Oh, I like this kind of apple. I don't like this kind of apple. I personally like to eat my apples with peanut butter. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll chop this apple and then I'll have it with some peanut butter. It's going to make a nice snack. Right. So I'm looking at this apple through my lens. But if I were to take my lens off and you just hand it to me, like the goal would be to just see it as it is. It's just an apple in my hand.
That's it. No, and I think that piece you said earlier is such an important piece of like 90% bad, 10% good, because the true, I firmly believe that in every situation there has to be a little percent of good. Let's say the worst thing. Honestly, the mugging, I don't like saying it to nobody, because the way people react to it, it's been the best day of the year, honestly, in a weird way, Kelly, because it knocked something into me of like perspective, of understanding like, A, you were very lucky, but B, you're able to keep your own against 3 black dudes. It was a very eye-opening. I've been like shifted back to like super disciplined, that. So it was different to me than what people think of it. But I think in every situation, you could choose to look at the negatives of it, or you can choose to look at the positives of it. And I think comes back to like, even if you look at life, like you could say, life has no meaning. It's great. It's the best part. Or you could say life has no meaning. Like you look at it, it's the same thing. and you could always choose to look more positively. And I think that's something that in today's society, people don't quite choose to do. And I think that's why these techniques, these tools are such an important thing to get people to get there. I don't care how you get there. You want to check out, you know, Kelly's podcast, do it. You want to listen to this, do it. Whatever gets you to do it, as long as we all get to that point, and everybody has a different tunnel or a different pathway to get there.
Yeah, I think of it as just tools for your toolbox, and then how you utilize those tools is up to you.
Yeah. And the fun part of this is like getting, for me at least, getting to talk to all you guys, because like now we didn't talk about this. We are 35 minutes into this. Nidra yoga, you have to tell me more, because I've been waiting to have somebody who dabbles in this. I've done the Kundalini. I've dabbled in Kriya. I currently do a lot of yin yoga, a lot of holding, because, you know, I want to torture my mind. But how did you get
And to give your fascia some love.
Yes, really, because I got to find something that's stretchy. Well, you got into yoga when you were training athletes or students in high school or college, something like that?
Yeah, so I was always an athlete through college, and I started yoga when I was really young, like as cross training for my sport. So I started it as like, as many people do, where it's like for the stretch, right? And I'm doing this, you know, in quotations as the stretch. And I used to be like a Shavasana skipper. So I'd go to like the hardest class I could go to, get all sweaty, try to get as bendy as possible. And then when we lay down on the mat to practice Shavasana, that final pose, I'd like roll up my mat and like walk out the door and like wait for my mom to pick me up. And it was something I was really there for the physical. And I think that's where a lot of people start, which is not a bad thing. That is a great like front door to walk in to practice yoga. But a lot of the tools that I like to use now are still, you know, in that 8-limb path under that umbrella, Patanjali's umbrella of yoga, but they're kind of like the softer sides, the more introspective side. So meditation, you know, restorative yoga, but yoga nidra is definitely one of my loves. And it's something that I not only practice, but I train people. I train yoga nidra teachers now. And I think, Scott, you in particular will really enjoy yoga nidra because it's one of the purest forms of pratyahara, or withdrawal of the senses, that we can use. So what you're doing with this practice is you are taking a conscious journey through the different layers of your being. So in yoga, we call that the koshas. And think of it as kind of like those little like Russian nesting dolls, where it's like you have the original one in the center, but you start with the big one and you open it up and there's another copy inside, that you open up another one and another one and another one. And you're trying to get to the center, the original. So for us, we call that Atman, or the true self. And when you're practicing yoga nidra, what it feels like, it'll feel like a long guided meditation. So you'll be laying on the mat, you'll be in Shavasana. The guide will just be walking you through different techniques. You'll move through your body, you'll practice a little bit of breath, you'll do some opposing feelings and sensations, some imagery. And then hopefully by doing these different exercises and journeying through the koshas, you'll then come face to face with your true self. You can call this whatever you want to call it: true self, soul, Atman, highest self, most authentic self, insert whatever you call this space. And you plant the positive seed of intention, or we call it a sankalpa, into the true self. And we try to just spend some quality time with the true self. And the idea is that we're working with the body. You're like trying to put the body to sleep while keeping the consciousness awake, which is a really interesting concept. And there's a lot of really great studies out there actually on how yoga nidra can help with PTSD. The VA does a lot of yoga nidra work with their veterans who have PTSD, to try to put the body asleep in a way to minimize the physiological responses to triggers, to then work on some healing on a non-physical level.
And when you start, it sounds fantastic. By the way, I'm in the deprivation tank weekly, so I'm all with it. When you start, are you guys starting with a body scan to get yourself more aware of the body?
So what you do is you start with a kind of a preliminary relaxation technique. So maybe you take a few deep breaths, or you know, you maybe do a quick body scan, something like that. You start with your preliminary relaxation technique. Then you're going to set your intention. The facilitator, the teacher will, you know, have an intention. Maybe you're working on self-love or whatever it is. Then you'll go into, it's called rotation of awareness in the body, which is some form of a body scan, but it's usually pretty detailed. So you might be saying like right eye, left eye, right eyebrow, left eyebrow, like really taking your time. Then you'll go into a breath awareness technique. So this can be any kind of pranayama, as long as it isn't too active, or it can even be something as simple as following the breath on the inhale as it moves in through the nose, through the sinuses, down the throat to the lungs, and then feel that process reverse itself on the exhale. So you're going to do, a little bit of breath focus for a while. Then you move into pairs of opposing feelings and sensations. So you may do something like feel your body become hot. Now feel your body become cold. The idea behind all of these is each kosha is connected to something different and it has a different language, and you speak that kosha's language through these different techniques. So then after you do opposing feelings and sensations, you'll do imagery. It'll either be random imagery. So your guide will call out just a bunch of images, a white table, a burning candle, a red sunset, a blanket, whatever it is. Or it'll be guided imagery, kind of like what you hear in a guided meditation or what you hear in my podcast. See yourself standing in a forest, look around. What do you smell? You're walking in the forest. And then after the visualization piece, you then have a little bit of intentional silence where you are hopefully connecting with the true self. And then you'll state your intention again. And then you kind of gently come out of that practice. And that whole thing takes usually between 30 and 60 minutes.
That sounds absolutely wonderful, honestly.
You should try it.
Yeah.
You've never done it before.
No. I want when I do stuff, I don't want to like YouTube it to start. I want to like just see. I want to go. So I found like Kundalini of real people. I'm like, this is a lot. That's a whole thing. Kriya yoga. I'm in like a very religious area in Brooklyn, but they're very authentic. So seeing the white Italian kid from Brooklyn, I think I'm like out of my mind. I'm like, no, I'm just trying to test it out. But like, if I wanted to, where would I start? Could we go? Do you have something on this?
I have a lot of full yoga nidra practices on my podcast
Beautiful.
on Mindful in Minutes. So you can always just hit play. It will feel a lot like a long guided meditation. So it's a very easy practice to use, just like to do on your own, just listening. No movement. You're in Shavasana. You just listen and you do what the guide is telling you to do.
And you're gonna walk me through all of that whole process.
Everything, the whole thing.
In the morning is better to start?
I would do it in the evening actually, because you're spending so much time turning inward. Yes, you're turning inward, withdrawal of the senses, you're journeying. Have you ever whether you do like hypnosis or you have a long meditation, and you know how sometimes it like takes you a while to kind of like reawaken and like reintegrate and kind of get back into that? Do you know what I mean? You kind of need to wake up a little bit.
This is known for that, right? This is supposed to be a half awake.
Yeah, so this like really gets you to that place. So I recommend, and like when I teach yoga nidra here, it's usually like 7:30, 8 p.m. It's like the last thing you do, and then you just like go to bed, and it can help improve insomnia too. So
that is a perfect nighttime. That is a promise that I'm going to be listening, because I need a night. I'm all good getting jacked up in the morning. We do stuff to go. I think I need to. I don't have anything for my nighttime stuff, and I was thinking about that.
Remind me. I'll send you some things.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
What is your whole what is the self-care routine look like for Kelly?
Kelly's self-care routine is very sparse. I have a toddler at home. This is my very, authentic answer. I look at my resources as a person and my capacity as a person. I think of it like a pizza. It is a finite thing. So, an Italian kid from Brooklyn, I'm sure you'll really resonate with my pizza analogy. However, if this pizza is, there's only a certain amount of slices, there's different parts of my life, and there's only one pizza that can go around. And at different points in your life, different areas will need more of that pizza. And my son takes a lot of it right now. My business takes a lot of it. My just existing as a family member right now is taking a lot of it. And then I kind of take what is left over. I'm not saying that's necessarily the right way to do it, but I do think of my resources and what I have is a finite thing, right? Like a pizza. When all slices are gone, they're gone. So what I try to do is I really believe in like little micro habits. So I do, I try to meditate. However, studies tell us that 8 to 12 minutes a day is enough. So I'd be realistic, and I'm like, I only have time for 10 minutes today. So that's fine. I don't give myself a hard time about it. I do my 10 minutes and that's it. I try to move my body 4 times a week. And I try to just take little moments here and there to recharge. And I also try to self-care to me looks like being honest and realistic with myself.
That is the most honest answer I've heard somebody say, because I'm sure people come on and be like, oh, listen, I got to be, for me first, 4 a.m., I'm up, I'm doing the whole thing, blah, 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 blah. No, thank you for that. And I do think maybe you're too selfless, Kelly. Is this possible?
Oh, this is definitely possible. I think this is, yeah, that's definitely possible. But for me, and I mean, the way I describe it, it does make me sound a little more selfless than I actually am. But when I say I try to be realistic, what that means is like, I'm like, if I need sleep, which, I don't get as much as I should, but like, if I need sleep, I will just go to bed early and prioritize my sleep. If that means just a quick little meditation, or, maybe I'm visualizing something as I fall asleep, like I'm going to be kind to myself and recognize that that's the priority right now, is like caring for these things. I do think that, whether it's like a self-care routine, or again, thinking about it as that pizza, I think this ebbs and flows. So I think in the season of life that I'm currently in right now, where I have an individual that not only was grown from my body, but also then was fed with my body and sustained, like my body and my life sustained two lives for quite a while. That is not a small undertaking. And that in and of itself is going to require you to then give up more of that pizza to someone else. However, it's slowly changing over time. And so I think for me, keeping an open mind and being kind to myself and letting it ebb and flow and change, and recognizing that like all of these things are temporary, that's kind of what I have to do for myself. And so if that means I used to have much more of a routine and do more self-care type things, but self-care just looks different for me right now. It's like getting an actual night's sleep. It's also sometimes shutting down work early because I miss my son. And so I'm going to go be with him to like fill up my heart in that way. Like it just looks different, and kind of staying connected to who I am and what I need and trying to fulfill that. Like instead of, it's like if you're watering a plant, you can't just like dump a ton of water on it like once and then be like, okay, I'll water you again in a month. It's like you have to kind of, I mean, some plants like that, but you have to kind of continually like maintenance, just a little bit of water, every so often. And I try to think of my self-care more like that, like these little things like here and there, like what do I need right now to maintain and to practice these little micro habits of self-care, instead of like going and doing like one big thing and then 3 months later doing another like big thing.
That is a very yogi answer of you, Kelly. It's like very flowy. We can let stuff go. And I think through your practice, I could tell it works, because like, just like it could happen, it could not happen. Like we don't know. That's the one thing COVID did for me. Like I was out of control with I had maybe a 5-hour self-care routine, Kelly.
Okay,
It was
that's like a whole day.
It was 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. So I was done and ready for work, but had to work out for 2 hours. I got to meditate for my cousin. Like, you're meditating for an hour and a half. Like, do you need to meditate for an hour and a half? And once everything came back into the life, I'm like, so I do think everybody listening, that I go too much, but I think there's so much good in what you're saying, because it's like, yeah, life is changing, and particularly like you're just being a rational person. Like I have a son, and he's more important at this point. And once pork chop is 5, we're sending that kid off to school anyway, so it's coming right back. The self-care routine is coming back, right?
It is.
So.
It all ebbs and it all flows. Scott, do you mind if I ask you if you have ADHD? I have ADHD.
No, I do not, but
okay.
I would think in some form I do. I consider it. Yeah.
No, the only reason that I ask is because one, it's very easy to kind of fall down like wormholes and to get very into a particular thing with ADHD, to get like really hyper fixated. I'm like really going all in on that thing.
This is
so
my
when
life,
you said that,
Kelly.
that
So you're very, very, and I talk faster than most. So, but no, I'm with you. This is the issue I have with like adding things on, because I want to get really good with things really quickly. And I would say it's more of a having to feel worthy issue of not having confidence. That's probably why I'm like, I have to get so good. Like, it's okay to not be good at everything, but for me, it's not on the table.
So I appreciate that so much, especially having that awareness. Cause like for me, it's not necessarily a confidence thing, but something that I've learned about myself is that I put so much value on my productivity and like my ability to like do and create and to manage and to like have a business and run this podcast and be a mother and also be a partner and try to be a good friend and constantly be doing like, and run these retreats and do all of this stuff. And it's like, to me, not doing a lot felt, quote, lazy and bad. And I recognize that I put so much of my own worth and value on my ability to be like productive and to do and to create. And I think, and it's very easy for me to always keep bringing it back to meditation, but really this is truly why I love it so much, because meditation teaches you how to be an observer of what's happening within you and around you. So once I recognized, like, wow, I'm not doing all of these things because I actually have to do all of these things. I'm doing them because I only feel like I'm of value to myself and to others when I'm like producing and like doing stuff. And it's only because I have been practicing for years this ability to observe, my thoughts and how I'm feeling, that it, and therapy too, it allows me to just kind of connect the dots a little bit easier. So I think it's so great that you have that awareness. And I'm curious, now that this is like our therapy session, but I'm so curious, like what would happen if you were bad at something? Like, what would be the worst case scenario? What if you tried something? What if you tried a new style of yoga? Say you try yoga nidra for the first time, even though you really can't be bad at it. But let's say you try it, or you take an art class and you're no Van Gogh. Like what would be the worst case scenario?
I mean,
like nothing, right? I don't know.
The reality is nothing, but the truth is we would just keep doing it until we get good at it.
Isn't that exhausting?
It's exhausting. Believe me. My mother said this to me literally months ago. She was like, how much more? Because I've had this whole thing of like tackling the material world. You got to make a lot of money. So I deal with billionaires every day. We do all this stuff, put on the suit, tackle that world. Now I'm trying to tackle the spiritual world. Yeah, it's not good. It's not. It's a little exhausting. And I do think the meditation for me does. I'm at this weird point in my meditations. I would say I'm 5 or 6 years in, where it's like you're aware of everything, but you're not quite able to change anything yet. And this is like the purgatory, I've been told. It's like you're aware of everything, but you're not quite able to change it. So I'm just trying every day, just like I've been better. 20-minute meditating now. I'm not doing an hour.
That's amazing.
Because I have to. Less is more. Oh my God. See, I feel like a failure for even saying that. I feel like that's some bullshit, Kelly.
No. Sometimes less is more, sometimes more is more, but sometimes less is more. But the important part is being able to recognize the difference between the two. Scott, I think you should try loving kindness meditation, or like a metta meditation. Have you ever dabbled in this?
What the hell are you saying?
Okay, I think you need to try it. I like to practice this thing. It's called TWIM. And I'm not telling you this so that you can put this on your to-do list, to master list.
How good could I get at this yoga kindness?
Yeah. So we're not doing that, but TWIM stands for Tranquil Wisdom Insight Meditation. It's a kind of loving kindness meditation. And what that means is that you're really focusing on igniting the feeling of loving kindness within you. And then you take turns radiating it to other people, but you end with radiating it to yourself. I have found this for any of my, whether it be perfectionists or people who are hard on themselves, like I am on myself, I have found this to be one of the best styles of meditation to help with that, is because you just basically ignite this feeling of loving kindness. Then you radiate it to someone where it's really easy to radiate, right? Like a good friend, a loved one, your pet, someone where it's like, oh, like, of course I want all this loving kindness to go to them. Then you send it to someone neutral. So the, person who made your coffee this morning, or the mailman, or whatever it is. Then you send it to someone who's challenging, someone, you don't have to start with the biggest, baddest, your middle school bully, but just someone who's just kind of annoying, gets under your skin or challenges you. Send them with the same, amount of authenticity and, zest that you would to the person that you like and the neutral person. Then often the hardest piece is you end by radiating it back to yourself, and you have to radiate it with the same, or you're trying with the same level of zest and, authenticity to the self, and recognizing that you are just as worthy of that loving kindness. And I find it really, really helps to soften the edges at times.
Wow. That is, listen, usually I've heard of things. I'd never heard of that before in my life. And it sounds great. So I got to do some yoga.
Give it a try. But don't make it the next thing you're going to master. No. Just dabble in it, Scott. Just, hands off. Just give it a try. Dabble.
Couple times a week. We're going to do the TWIM, nothing thing. But how good could I get? How quickly? How many times could I do it till I get better? No, I'm not doing that. I'm really not. And yoga nidra,
Yeah,
that's why I think I like that, because I'm like with yoga, I'm like looking at how how stretchy are you feeling? How long could you go with the yin? Yoga nidra, there's no test, there's no game, there's no nobody. It's just me,
Yep.
and we're just uncovering the layers like an onion.
Yep. You got it. That's it.
Okay, I have some homework. Kelly Smith, thank you so much. This was like very fun, half therapy, half knowledgeable, half BSing with somebody. This was good times.
What? I do what I can. What can I say? Giving you that slice of my pizza today.
Yes, save some for pork chop though, of course.
Oh, always. He always eats first. Let's be real.
Yeah, of course.
Those
And
baby boys, they're hungry.
got that right. And yeah, that's it. And everybody could find the all Kelly's information below. Mindful in minutes, yoga for you. We'll put all of that below, and just please check her stuff out. If you have any questions, reach out to her on Instagram. We'll put that below too. And that's it, Kelly. Thank you so much again.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for such a delightful chat. It was so great.
Of course. Thank you for therapizing me. That's it, people. Please like, subscribe, review, all that bullshit. But more importantly, tell one of your friends about the pod. It's been doing a lot. Thank you guys so much for the biggest month in October. That's it. As always, stay safe, stay positive, stay blessed. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.